Keanu Reeves thought he just needed a quick repair, until an elderly mechanic touched the engine and clutched his chest. What started as a simple fix turned into something life-altering. Who was this man, and why did Keanu drop everything to return the next day? The truth he uncovered would leave him and the entire city forever changed. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon when the engine gave its first stuttering cough. Keanu Reeves frowned as his hand gripped the steering wheel of his 1969 Mustang. The car had been with him for years. It wasn't a collector's item in the traditional sense, not the kind that made headlines, but to Keanu it held memories. Memories of simpler times. Memories of drives with his mother. The kind of car you keep because of what it meant, not what it cost. Another sputter. The engine whined. Then it lurched. Keanu coasted toward the side of a forgotten road, the kind where streetlights flickered half-heartedly and sidewalks cracked beneath years of neglect. The Mustang shuddered once more before giving out completely, rolling to a silent stop just outside a block of shuttered storefronts. He turned the key again. Nothing. Keanu stepped out, the fading light painting his black jacket in streaks of amber and dust. The street was quiet except for the hum of a few tired cicadas and the distant rattle of an old box fan behind a second-story window. His boots scuffed the pavement as he walked forward, scanning the nearby buildings. One storefront caught his eye. The sign was worn, its red paint chipped and curling like old parchment, but the words were still clear enough to read. Manny's Auto, Est, 1972. A single light buzzed faintly behind the garage window. Keanu approached slowly, pushing the door open with a low creak. The smell of oil and metal hit him instantly. Inside, surrounded by decades of tools and memory, stood an elderly man hunched over the hood of a faded Toyota. Grease clung to his hands, and sweat beaded on his brow despite the cooling air. He wiped at it absently with a stained rag. "Evening," Keanu said gently, careful not to startle him. The man glanced up, squinting. His face was carved with lines that spoke of long days and harder nights. His hair was gray, wiry, and untamed beneath a faded Dodgers cap. "You stuck or lost?" the man asked, voice gravelly, not unkind. "Bit of both, maybe," Keanu replied with a hint of a smile. "My Mustang died just outside. Was hoping you might have a minute." The mechanic grunted, setting down a wrench. "Depends on what kind of minute you're asking for. I don't do rebuilds after sundown." "Just a look," Keanu said. "Nothing major, I think." The man nodded once. "Pop the hood." Keanu led him to the curb where the Mustang sat, its engine cooled but lifeless. The mechanic walked with a slight limp, his boots dragging just a touch. Still, there was something steady in the way he moved, like a man who had spent 50 years in the same rhythm and saw no reason to change it now. The hood creaked open. The older man peered inside, immediately reaching for the dipstick with fingers that knew exactly where to go, as if reading Braille in the dark. He didn't speak at first, just listened, touched, smelled. Keanu watched silently. "Nice engine," the man muttered after a while. "Good bones. Problem is, it's talking and no one's been listening." He tightened a hose, adjusted a valve. Then he paused. His breath hitched for the briefest second. One hand moved to his chest, resting lightly against it. His eyes narrowed. Whether in pain or frustration, Keanu couldn't tell. "You okay?" Keanu asked quietly. The man waved him off. "Just too many years, under too many hoods. Nothing I can't handle." Keanu didn't push. He respected boundaries. But something about that pause stayed with him. "You get a name?" Keanu asked. "Manny," the man replied. "Ortega." Keanu extended a hand. "Thanks, Manny." Manny stared at the hand for a second longer than necessary before wiping his on his pant leg and accepting. His grip was firm, despite the tremble he tried to hide. "You from around here?" Manny asked, not looking up from the engine now. "Not far," Keanu answered. "Passing through. Figures, this neighborhood doesn't see much traffic anymore unless it's lost or broken. Guess I qualify as both." Manny smirked at that, just a little. Then his hands moved quickly, tightening a belt, replacing a fuse with one from his shirt pocket. He reached deep into the engine, leaning in harder than a man his age should. Keanu stepped forward, ready to catch him if he swayed. But Manny steadied himself. Finally, he stepped back. "Try her, now." Keanu turned the key. The engine roared to life, clean and steady. The sound was beautiful. He stepped out, smiling. "You've got magic hands." Manny shrugged. "Just got years." Keanu reached for his wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Manny shook his head. "Nothing. Not for something this simple. I insist." "I don't. Wasn't nothing but a loose connection and a tired car." Keanu hesitated, then tucked his wallet away. "Thank you." Manny wiped his hands again, already turning back toward the garage. "Drive careful. Don't push her till morning." Keanu looked at the shop, then at the man disappearing into it. Something pulled at him, an ache in his chest that didn't come from a car. He slid into the driver's seat and started to roll forward. The sun had fully dipped behind the city's low skyline now, leaving only the orange afterglow that clung to the edges of rooftops and alleyways. As the Mustang hummed along, restored and reliable once more, Keanu found himself glancing in the rearview mirror. The garage faded quickly into the backdrop of cracked buildings and tired streets. But that sign, Manny's auto, lingered in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the man. There was something about him, the quiet way he moved, the way his tools seemed to obey without question, the way he brushed aside the pain in his chest like it was just another bolt to tighten. Most people Keanu encountered treated their time like currency, always calculating if something was worth their effort. Manny? Manny moved like he had already given all his time away, and kept giving anyway. Keanu slowed at the next stoplight. His fingers rested on the steering wheel, but his thoughts were still in that dim shop. He had met a lot of people in his life. Famous people, powerful people, folks who changed the temperature in a room just by walking in. But Manny Ortega? That man had gravity. Keanu had offered money, more out of respect than obligation, and been turned down with a grunt. It wasn't pride that made Manny refuse. It was principle. The kind of man who valued work for its own sake. The kind who fixed things because broken things deserved one more shot. And yet, that moment when his hand reached for his chest kept replaying. Manny had flinched, a flash of pain, quick, subtle, but real. Keanu's gut twisted. He should have said something, asked if Manny had someone to call, a family member, a friend. But he didn't. He just drove away. Still, he couldn't let it go. Not the grease-stained walls of that shop. Not the silence that clung to the place like dust. Not the weariness in Manny's bones that said he'd given more than anyone had ever returned. Keanu's foot hovered over the brake. He thought for a moment about turning around, about asking Manny if he needed anything, even just a coffee, but he didn't. Instead, he kept driving. Behind him, the glow of Manny's flickering light disappeared into the dark. But something inside Keanu stirred, something unresolved. This wasn't the last time he'd see Manny Ortega. He just didn't know it yet. He had been home for hours, the Mustang now parked safe in the garage, but his mind hadn't followed him inside. It was still back at that corner of the city, where an old man with a worn Dodgers cap stood over a hood like a priest at an altar. Something about Manny Ortega had gotten under his skin. The way he worked in silence, the way he dismissed pain like it was nothing more than a squeaky hinge, the way he had refused payment not to prove a point, but because that's just who he was. Keanu sat at his kitchen table, a single desk lamp casting a soft glow over his laptop. He opened the browser and typed slowly, Manny's Auto Garage, Los Angeles. The first result was a simple website, so plain it might have been built 20 years ago. No animation, no banner ads. Just a white background, a photo of the shop's faded sign, and the words, "Honest repairs since 1972, walk-ins welcome." There were no Google reviews, no links to social media, no recent updates. The last post under News was dated 2011. "Will be closed this weekend for Thanksgiving, back Monday." Keanu scrolled down. The only contact was a phone number, probably a landline, and a P.O. box. That was it. He narrowed the search and tried again, this time entering Manny Ortega, mechanic, Los Angeles. That's when he found it. An old newspaper clipping, archived on a forgotten blog. Mechanic of the people, Manny Ortega keeps engines and spirits running in East LA. Published in 1998. The scanned page was yellowed and blurry, but Keanu leaned closer. The article described a local mechanic known for fixing cars at no cost when people couldn't pay. A man who stayed open late for single mothers, who helped teenagers learn about engines instead of joining gangs. One quote stood out. "Manny doesn't just fix what's broken under the hood. He fixes what's broken around here." Keanu sat back, jaw tight. He clicked on the author's name, but the link led nowhere. Just another abandoned page in a forgotten corner of the internet. But there was a comments section, and the comments told the real story. The comments stretched back years. Some were short, some read like confessions. One said, "I was 17, trying to get to a job interview. My car wouldn't start. Manny drove out himself, gave it a jump, and didn't charge me a dime. I got the job. I've never forgotten." Another, "When my dad died, I had no way to get to the funeral home. Manny fixed up his old pickup the night before. Told me he deserves one last ride in it." Keanu read each line carefully, his fingers still on the trackpad, but unmoving. He kept scrolling. A mother wrote, "My son was heading down the wrong path. Manny let him hang around the shop, taught him how to rebuild an engine, said it'd give him something to hold on to. That boy is now 28 and owns his own repair business." And another, "I tried to give him money once. He looked me in the eye and said, 'If I charged you, it wouldn't mean anything. Just pay it forward when you can.'" The more Keanu read, the heavier it all felt. The weight of it settled in his chest like wet cement. This man, who barely said a word to him, had done more for people than most would in a lifetime. But no one, outside of that block, seemed to know. Keanu closed the laptop slowly. He didn't know what he was going to do yet. But he knew one thing. He had to go back. The next morning, just after 9, Keanu drove back down the same forgotten road. This time, he parked a little farther down and walked. From across the street, he could see the shop. The garage door was open, the morning light spilling in across a rusted floor jack and a cluttered workbench. Manny was inside, moving slowly. He wiped down a tool, then bent down to pick something up from the floor. He paused. His hand went to his side. He stayed hunched for a few seconds too long. Keanu's body tensed instinctively, but he didn't step forward. Manny straightened eventually, though stiffly. He turned and walked back inside. Keanu crossed the street, not to the garage, but to the small diner next door with fogged-up windows and a bell that jingled when the door opened. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee filled the air. A waitress in her 50s glanced up from behind the counter, flipping through a crossword puzzle with a pencil behind her ear. "Sit anywhere," she said, without looking. Keanu slid into a booth near the window, where he could still see the garage across the street. The waitress came over with a pad. "What can I get you?" "Just coffee," he replied. "Black?" She nodded. "Coming up." As she walked away, he looked back at the garage. Manny had pulled another vehicle into the bay, a rusted Dodge van with one headlight dangling like a loose tooth. The old man moved with slow intention, dragging an air compressor into place. When the waitress returned, she set the cup down and studied him for a second. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," Keanu replied, offering a faint smile. She folded her arms. "But you're watching Manny's place, like it owes you something." "Just curious." The woman sat on the edge of the booth across from him. "Manny doesn't take kindly to charity, if that's what you're thinking." "I'm not," Keanu said. "I met him yesterday. He fixed my car. Wouldn't let me pay." She snorted. "Sounds like him." Keanu paused. "He doesn't look well." The waitress's expression softened. She nodded slowly. "He's not, but don't expect him to admit it. Stubborn old thing's been that way since I was a kid." "He's got family?" Her face changed, a subtle flicker of grief. She looked away. "Had a son," she said finally. "Name was Mateo, Army. Didn't come back from his third tour. After that, Manny stopped being Manny. Didn't talk to nobody for months. Wouldn't close the shop either. Just kept working." Keanu sat with the weight of that. "After Mateo," she continued, "it was like the garage was all he had left. That's where they spent the most time together. You'd walk by and hear them arguing over tools, over who knew better. But they were close, real close." "And now?" Keanu asked. The woman shrugged. "Now he just keeps going. I don't think he's got anything else." She stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "But if you're looking to help, don't come at him with pity. That man's got too much pride for that." Keanu looked back through the window. Manny was still working, still holding himself together by sheer will. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do yet, but he knew he wasn't going to walk away again. Keanu Reeves pulled the Mustang up to the curb just after noon the following day. The car ran fine, better than fine, actually. Manny had tuned it with the precision that only came from decades under the hood. But Keanu wasn't there because of the engine. He stepped out, took a slow breath, and walked into the open garage. Manny was hunched under the hood of a faded green Buick this time. Same grease-streaked cap, same stained flannel shirt rolled up to the elbows. The man didn't even glance up when Keanu approached. "Didn't expect to see you again," Manny said without looking. Keanu smiled. "Yeah, well..." The Mustang started making a new sound. "Figured I should get it checked." Manny gave a grunt. "They always do once you start listening too close." "I guess I've been listening?" Manny looked up now, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Park her around back. I'll get to it in a bit." Keanu nodded and rolled the car into the rear lot. When he came back, Manny was wiping his hands and motioned toward a stool near the wall. "Won't take long," he said. "Probably nothing, but I'll have a look." Keanu took the seat, watching as Manny pulled open the Mustang's hood again. He didn't speak right away, just moved through his tools in a slow, practiced rhythm. "How long have you been doing this?" Keanu asked. Manny glanced over. "What, fixing busted egos or busted engines?" Keanu chuckled. "Engines." The old man leaned down into the engine bay, fingers brushing along the hoses like he was reading Braille. "Since before you were born," he said. "Opened this place in '72, but I was wrenching long before that, back when you needed to hear what was wrong." Keanu leaned back. "You mean before diagnostics?" "I mean before people stopped listening," Manny muttered. "Machines talk. Most folks don't know how to listen anymore. They rely on codes, lights, screens. But an engine will tell you everything if you pay attention." Keanu nodded, watching him closely. There was something poetic in the way Manny spoke. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just telling the truth, the only way he knew how. "And you've been here ever since?" "Where else would I go?" Manny replied. "The shop's been mine longer than anything else. Longer than my house, longer than..." He paused, his hands freezing mid-turn on a socket wrench. His breath hitched. It was subtle, quick, but Keanu saw it. Manny's right hand shifted toward his ribs. He pressed it there lightly, then sucked in a slow breath through his teeth. "You okay?" Keanu asked, voice low. "I'm fine," Manny snapped, sharper than before. "Just stood up too quick. This heat don't help either." Keanu didn't argue, but the worry in his chest didn't ease. Manny straightened up slowly, adjusting the back of his shirt as he turned toward a rag on the workbench. He moved with the kind of stiffness that didn't come from a bad night's sleep, but from something deeper. Something that settled in the bones and refused to leave. Keanu rose from the stool, offering a bottle of water he'd grabbed from the cooler just outside the office. Manny took it with a grunt of acknowledgement. "Appreciate it." They stood in silence for a moment. The only sound came from the ticking of the Mustang's engine as it cooled. The shop smelled of old oil, sun-warmed tires, and the kind of rust that crept into corners no matter how often you cleaned. Keanu spoke softly. "You ever think about slowing down?" Manny's laugh was dry, almost brittle. "Slowing down is when you start dying. I stop moving, I stop breathing. You don't take days off?" "Not unless someone dies, and even then, it better be someone close." Keanu studied him. The man looked thinner up close than he had the first night, his cheeks slightly sunken, the skin around his eyes darker, as if sleep had become a stranger. "You live nearby?" Keanu asked, trying to keep the tone light. "Apartment over the shop," Manny said, twisting the cap off the bottle. "Why waste gas when the job's 5 steps away?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Efficient." "Smart," Manny corrected. "Saves money. These days, every damn penny matters." He didn't elaborate. Keanu didn't press. But he was thinking now about the diner waitress's words, about the son Manny had lost, about the silence that had moved in ever since. Manny leaned over the engine again, twisting something gently. "Your car's fine," he said. "No issues I can hear. Probably just your ears playing tricks on you." Keanu nodded slowly. Manny closed the hood with a gentle thud, then leaned against the fender, sipping from the bottle. "You ever fix anything other than cars?" Keanu asked. Manny gave him a sideways look. "Like what?" "People. Lives." Manny's gaze drifted out toward the open garage door. A breeze stirred the dust just outside, lifting a candy wrapper that danced across the sidewalk before landing beside a storm drain. "I've seen a lot of broken things," Manny said finally. "Some you can fix, others you just try to keep from falling apart worse." Keanu didn't respond, he just nodded. In that moment, he wasn't Keanu Reeves the actor or the celebrity. He was just a man talking to another man. A man who had clearly seen too much, lost too much, and still chose to give. Keanu stayed for another 10 minutes, making small talk while Manny wiped tools, cleaned a bench, and checked the tires on an old van parked along the side. The conversation drifted: cars, the price of parts, the way newer mechanics skipped steps to save time. But Keanu kept watching. Every time Manny bent over, his face tightened. Every time he twisted or lifted something heavier than a socket wrench, he paused longer than he should have. It wasn't pride, it was habit. A life lived by routine and stubbornness. Eventually, Keanu pushed away from the wall. "Well," he said, "guess I should get going." Manny nodded. "She's good to drive. Just don't overthink every little sound." "I'll try not to." As Keanu turned toward the back lot, Manny called out, "You a car guy or just someone who likes pretending?" Keanu glanced over his shoulder, grinning. "Little of both." Manny smirked. "Could have fooled me. You handled that Mustang like it's part of you." Keanu nodded once. "It kind of is." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "You ever need anything, Manny? Anything at all? You call me." Manny raised an eyebrow. "I don't have your number." Keanu pulled a card from his jacket pocket. Nothing flashy, just his name and a number. "Now you do." Manny took it, holding it between 2 grease-stained fingers. He didn't say anything, but he didn't toss it either. Keanu walked to the car, started the engine, and let it idle for a few seconds. Then he looked back one last time. Manny was still standing in the same spot, the card now resting on the bench beside him. His face was unreadable. Keanu backed out slowly, pulled onto the road, and drove off without a word. But the image stayed in his rearview mirror, the solitary figure standing in the doorway of a garage that hadn't changed in half a century. Keanu knew now what he hadn't admitted before. Something was wrong, and this time he wasn't going to ignore it. The phone rang just past midnight. Keanu had been staring at the ceiling, his bedroom dim except for the soft glow of a street lamp filtering through the blinds. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. For a moment, he almost let it go to voicemail. Then something told him to pick up. "Hello? Mr. Reeves?" a familiar voice said, hesitant. "This is Keanu. Who's calling?" "It's Linda," the voice said. "From the diner, across from Manny's shop." Keanu sat up. "Is something wrong?" There was a pause, then a sigh. He collapsed in the garage, just before closing. "He's at County General now." Keanu swung his legs out of bed. "How bad?" They may haven't said yet, but he was holding his chest. He looked pale. "I've seen a lot of things in my life, Mr. Reeves. That scared me." Keanu didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." He was out the door in under 5 minutes. The streets were empty, the city asleep, but his mind raced. Every moment from the garage replayed. The way Manny paused, the way he pushed through the pain like it didn't matter, the way he brushed off concern with a grunt and a wave. Keanu gripped the wheel tighter. He should have done more, said more, called someone. When he arrived at the hospital, the lobby was lit with that same sterile brightness every hospital carried, no matter the city or time. The smell of antiseptic hit him as he walked in. The woman at the front desk barely looked up until he asked, "I'm looking for Manny Ortega. He came in tonight, chest pain, maybe a collapse." She typed into her computer, "Room 211, second floor." Keanu thanked her and made his way to the elevators. The ride up felt slow, painfully so. He walked down the hallway, past doors with sleeping patients, soft beeping monitors, and tired nurses moving like shadows. Room 211's door was half open. Keanu stepped inside quietly. Manny lay in a hospital bed, one arm hooked to an IV, wires trailing to machines that blinked and beeped softly. His skin looked paler, thinner, like life had drained just slightly from his features. But his eyes were open, and when he saw Keanu, he groaned. "Tell me your car didn't die again." Keanu managed a smile, stepping inside. "Still runs like a dream. You, on the other hand?" Manny grunted, trying to sit up straighter. "Damn nurses won't let me stand. Say I'm supposed to rest." "You should," Keanu said, pulling a chair closer. "They said it was your heart." Manny nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yeah. Doc says it's tired. Guess it gave out before I did." Keanu leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "They say what's next?" Manny shrugged. "Bunch of scans, more tests, maybe a procedure, maybe pills, I don't know. Don't much care for doctors poking around where they don't belong. But they can help." "Maybe," Manny muttered, "but that ain't the point." Keanu was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke gently. "Let me help." Manny's eyes flicked toward him, sharp. "Don't start that." "I'm not offering charity," Keanu said calmly. "I'm offering support. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Keanu replied. "I know what kind of man you are. I've read about you. I've talked to people." Manny exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting toward the window. "I've made it this far, kid. Don't need saving now." "You don't need saving," Keanu said. "You need rest. You need a break. And you deserve it." Manny didn't answer. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence. Keanu looked down at his hands. "When I walked into your shop, I didn't expect anything, but I left thinking about you the whole night. I looked you up. You've done more for your community than most people with money or power ever do." Manny shifted in bed, uncomfortable. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know. That's why it matters." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Manny said, "What, you want to pay my bills now?" "If you'd let me, yes." Manny's jaw tightened. "Don't insult me." "It's not an insult, it's a thank you." "I don't need a thank you, I need to get back to work." Keanu looked him in the eye. "You nearly died today." Manny didn't flinch. "Not the first time I came close." "But you're not alone this time," Keanu said. "Not anymore." Manny looked away. His voice was quieter now. "You got a good heart, Keanu. But I've seen people like you come and go. Famous folks. People who mean well for 5 minutes, then disappear. I'm not disappearing. We'll see." Keanu stood. "You're not the only one who gets to be stubborn." A faint smirk touched Manny's lips. "You're a pain, you know that." "Yeah," Keanu said. "But I'm a persistent one." Manny closed his eyes, not asleep, just tired, maybe too tired to argue anymore. Keanu stood there for a long moment, watching him breathe. He thought about all the cars Manny had fixed, all the people he'd helped, all the late nights spent under flickering lights, holding engines together with nothing but knowledge and determination. And he thought about how easily all of that could be lost, forgotten, the moment Manny couldn't stand behind his bench anymore. The machines beeped in their steady rhythm, a soft reminder that time was still ticking. Keanu finally stepped back, walked quietly to the door. As he turned the handle, Manny's voice came again, low and rough. "Whew, don't make promises you can't keep." Keanu glanced over his shoulder. "Neither do you." Manny didn't respond, but his eyes followed Keanu until he disappeared through the doorway. Out in the hallway, Keanu stopped. He leaned against the wall, rubbing his hands over his face. He felt helpless in a way he hadn't in years. Not because he lacked the means, but because this wasn't a problem that could be solved with a check or a phone call. It was pride, history, grief, all wrapped into one man who had spent a lifetime giving and now didn't know how to receive. Keanu walked back to the elevator, slowly. As the doors closed, he made a quiet vow to himself. He would find a way. Even if Manny refused every offer, even if he slammed every door, Keanu wasn't going to walk away. Not again. Downstairs, the night air was cool, brushing against his skin like a whisper. He stood in the parking lot for a few moments, looking up at the hospital windows. Somewhere behind that glass, Manny was lying in a bed, pretending he wasn't in pain. Keanu started the Mustang and eased onto the road, but his mind was already moving ahead. He didn't know exactly how he would help, but he would, because men like Manny Ortega weren't supposed to fade into the background. They were supposed to be remembered, and this story wasn't over yet. Keanu sat alone in his living room, staring at the dim glow of his laptop screen. The silence around him was thick. His thoughts still circled around the hospital room, around the tired face of a man who had spent a lifetime helping others and couldn't accept help himself. Manny's story stuck with him, not just because of what had happened, but because of how easily it could be lost. There was no memoir, no newspaper front page, no fame or spotlight. Just a quiet shop, a weathered man, and hundreds of lives touched quietly in the shadows. Keanu opened a blank post window and stared at the blinking cursor. He didn't want this to be about him. It wasn't. This was about Manny. About making sure people knew what kind of man still walked among them. About honoring the life he had lived even before it was over. He started typing. "There's a mechanic in East LA who fixed my car last week. No charge, didn't care who I was, didn't ask questions, just did the work. Said seeing the engine run right was enough for him. I found out later he's been doing that for decades. For strangers, for single parents, for kids who had nowhere else to go. He's in the hospital now, heart trouble, the kind that doesn't wait around, and the world doesn't know his name. But they should." He paused, then added one more line. "If Manny Ortega ever helped you, tell someone. Let's make sure he's not forgotten. He didn't sign his name. He didn't need to. He posted it quietly, late at night, and closed the laptop. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the ripple had already begun. Keanu opened his phone to a stream of notifications. The post had exploded. Thousands of shares, comments pouring in faster than he could read. But what mattered most weren't the numbers, it was the voices. One woman wrote, "That's Manny. He fixed my brakes when I couldn't afford it so I could drive to my chemotherapy. Told me to pay him later. I never did. He never asked." A man followed with, "Manny taught my little brother how to work on engines instead of stealing cars. Gave him an old toolbox. Said it was payment for showing up every day. My brother's been clean 6 years now." Another said, "He towed my car home one night when I was stranded. Wouldn't take $1. Just said, you'd do the same." The stories multiplied, each one a thread in a quilt of quiet heroism. A local teacher posted, "I bring my students by his shop every spring. Manny always takes time to talk to them about responsibility, about tools, about fixing more than just machines." A father wrote, "Manny rebuilt my transmission when I was out of work. Said, you need to drive your kids to school more than you need to pay me." I never forgot that. The comments turned into momentum. Someone Keanu didn't know started a GoFundMe page. The description was simple. "This is for Manny Ortega, a man who spent 50 years fixing our lives without asking for anything in return. Now it's our turn." The donations started small, $5, $10, $20. Some left messages with them. For the time he replaced my radiator for free. For letting me hang around the shop when my home was falling apart. For believing in my son when no one else did. Keanu watched it all unfold from behind the scenes. He didn't comment, didn't like or share. He just watched. He had seen fame before. He knew what it looked like when it was shallow. This was different. This was real. And it wasn't about him. It was about a man in a hospital bed who didn't know the world was finally starting to see him. Within 24 hours, local news stations picked up the story. They didn't have a photo, they didn't even have a quote, but they had the name, Manny Ortega, mechanic, mentor, unsung hero of East LL. One segment showed a reporter standing outside the garage, the faded sign behind her, saying, "He never asked for recognition, but recognition came anyway." The donations climbed past $10,000, then 20, then more. Not from wealthy donors, not from companies, from people. Real people who remembered, who had carried the memory of a man fixing something in their lives, and finally had a way to repay it. Teenagers in the neighborhood began stopping by the shop, even though the garage was closed. Some offered to sweep the lot. Others just stood around quietly, unsure what to do, but feeling like they should be there. Keanu returned to the page late that night. The top comment read, "Manny gave me my first real job. I had just gotten out of juvie. He handed me a broom and said, 'Don't screw this up.' I didn't. Because of him, I never went back." Another person wrote, "I didn't know how to say thank you back then, so here it is. Thank you, Manny." The weight of it settled in Keanu's chest. It wasn't about the car anymore. It never had been. That quick repair had been the doorway to something much deeper, to a lifetime of quiet service that had touched more people than Manny would ever believe. And still, Manny didn't know. He was in the hospital, hooked up to machines, believing he was alone, believing he had outlived his purpose. Keanu stared at the screen. He wanted to tell him. He wanted to walk into that hospital room and say, "Look what you started." But something told him to wait. This wasn't the kind of thing you rushed. This was something you revealed when the heart was ready to see it. And Keanu knew this story was still unfolding. The world had finally turned its eyes toward Manny Ortega. Now it was Keanu's job to make sure the man himself knew what he had meant. Not just to a few people, but to a city. The next day, Keanu walked into County General with a quiet purpose. The sky was still gray from the early morning light, and the hospital's corridors felt as hushed as a chapel. He passed familiar faces, nurses who had seen too much, orderlies pushing carts of medications, patients sitting alone by windows waiting on news, but his focus didn't waver. He reached Manny's room and tapped gently on the half-open door. Manny was awake, propped up by a stack of pillows, wearing a hospital gown that looked 2 sizes too big. His eyes lifted as Keanu stepped inside, and a small frown pulled at his face. "You again," Manny said. "Didn't I run you off already?" Keanu grinned, setting a paper cup of real coffee on the bedside table. "Decided to come back for more abuse." Manny reached for the cup with a grumble. He took a sip, then gave an approving nod. "At least you remembered, no sugar." Keanu sat in the chair beside the bed, resting his elbows on his knees. He held up his phone. "There's something I want you to see. If it's another doctor talking about surgeries, you can spare me the sermon. It's not. Just watch." He pulled up the fundraiser page and angled the screen toward Manny. The old man squinted at first, then reached for his glasses from the tray beside him. As he slid them on, the page came into focus. Manny's name across the top, a photo of the shop, and numbers climbing far past anything modest. Manny stared at it. Keanu scrolled slowly through the messages. One after another, people had left words of thanks, memories, moments that had stayed with them long after the repair was done. Dozens of names, hundreds of dollars, then thousands. Manny's jaw clenched. "What is this?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He just kept scrolling. A message read, "You fixed my mom's car when I was 10. She never forgot it." Another, "You gave me my first job after I got out of juvie. I've had a steady paycheck ever since." And another, "You kept my car alive long enough for me to drive my wife to her last round of chemo. You didn't even charge me." Manny sat back against the pillows. His face had gone still, unreadable. He looked up at Keanu. "You did this?" "I made a post," Keanu said. "The rest came from them." "I didn't do this for recognition," Manny said, his voice low. Keanu nodded. "That's why it matters so much." Manny's eyes drifted back to the screen. He didn't say anything for a long time. The room was filled only with the sound of the monitor beeping softly, steady and slow. Keanu let the silence stretch. He knew better than to fill it. Manny wasn't the kind of man who needed words every second. He was the kind who measured silence like a tool in his belt. Finally, Manny exhaled, a sound that carried more weight than frustration. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," Keanu replied gently. "But they wanted to give it." "It's theirs, Manny. Every one of those people came looking for you." Manny rubbed his jaw, still staring at the screen. People forget fast these days. News cycles move quicker than tire rotations. "All this? It'll fade." Keanu shook his head. "Maybe, but the shop won't. Not if we do something real." Manny glanced at him, skeptical. "What do you mean?" Keanu sat up straighter. "I've been thinking. You've spent 50 years building that garage, not just fixing cars, building a community, teaching kids, mentoring people who had no one else. That kind of place shouldn't disappear when you're gone." Manny looked away. "That place was me. Without me, it's just a shell." "That's where you're wrong," Keanu said. "It's more than just you now. It belongs to everyone who ever walked through those doors needing help. You made something bigger than yourself." Manny didn't respond. Keanu leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What if we rebuilt it, not just to repair cars, but to train people? A community garage, a place where kids could learn the way you did, hands-on, with pride." Manny gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "A mechanic school? Not a school, a legacy." The word hung in the air. Manny shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the far wall where a few faded photos were taped up beside the small TV. Keanu followed his gaze. There was one of Manny and a young man in uniform, standing next to a beat-up Camaro. The resemblance was unmistakable. His son. Another photo showed the boy, younger, no uniform yet, holding a wrench twice too big for his hands while Manny looked on, half proud, half pleased. A letter was pinned just below. Its edges were curled with time. Handwritten in looping, careful script. Keanu didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. Manny looked at those photos like a man reading a chapter of his life out loud, quietly, without sound. Then he turned back to Keanu. His voice was softer now. "Let me think." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's all I ask." He rose from the chair and gave Manny space. The man looked smaller in that bed than he ever had in the shop. But something in his posture had changed. The shoulders weren't as slumped. The eyes weren't as distant. Manny stared back at the screen one last time before Keanu turned it off and slid the phone back into his jacket. "I don't want some foundation or publicity stunt," Manny warned, his tone firm again. "No camera crews, no speeches." "You won't get any of that from me," Keanu said. "This is about doing something real, quiet, if that's what you want, but real." Manny let out a breath through his nose. "Teaching kids," he muttered. "Don't even know if I've got the patience." "I've seen you," Keanu replied. "You taught a generation already. Most of them didn't even realize it." Manny leaned his head back, eyes closed for a moment. "I still miss him every day," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Keanu said. "I never met him, but I see him in everything you do." Manny didn't speak. His fingers rested near the edge of the blanket, twitching slightly like they were used to holding a wrench and didn't know what to do without it. "I'll come by tomorrow," Keanu said, "just to talk." "I might not be in the mood," Manny said, though without much bite. Keanu smiled. "I'll take my chances." He turned and walked toward the door. Just as his hand reached the knob, Manny's voice called out again. "Keanu!" Keanu turned. "Don't make me regret trusting you." "You won't," Keanu replied. "That's a promise I can keep." This time, Manny didn't argue. Keanu left the hospital with something shifting inside him. This wasn't about saving a shop anymore. It wasn't about one man's generosity or even one man's pride. It was about preserving something that had quietly shaped hundreds of lives. And now, maybe thousands more. Because Manny Ortega hadn't asked to be a hero. But the people around him had already decided that's exactly what he was. All Keanu had to do now was help him believe it. The hospital room was quiet. Outside the window, the city buzzed faintly in the distance. Car horns, sirens, the far-off hum of streetlights flickering on. But inside, all Manny Ortega heard was the soft rhythm of machines monitoring the beat of a heart he wasn't sure he could trust anymore. It was late. The nurses had dimmed the lights. Most of the other rooms on the floor were silent now, their patients either asleep or lost in their own thoughts. But Manny was wide awake. He shifted slowly, reaching for the small plastic bag on the side table, the one with his personal items. He pulled it into his lap and opened it carefully, like it might fall apart if he moved too fast. Inside were the things that had been with him when they admitted him. His wallet, his keys, a crushed pack of gum, and a folded piece of paper worn soft from years of opening and closing. He set everything else aside and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was familiar, neat, strong, with careful loops. His son Mateo had always written like that, even when he was a teenager. Even when his friends scribbled notes that looked like chaos, Mateo always took his time. Manny held the letter in both hands, flattening it on his lap. The words came back easily. He'd read them 100 times before, but tonight they felt different. "Dad, if anything ever happens to me, don't stop teaching. You gave me more than just engines to work on. You gave me something to believe in, something real. I want to do the same for other kids, especially the ones no one sees. Just like you did for me." Manny blinked, and the paper blurred slightly. "If I'm not around, don't close the shop. Don't shut yourself away. Give someone else a shot, even if they don't know they need it." He had kept the letter tucked behind a photograph for years, hidden beneath the day-to-day grind of wrenches and oil pans. Never far from reach, but never fully opened either. Reading it now felt like a hand reaching out across time, like his son had known exactly what would happen. Manny stared at the words. Then, for the first time in decades, his chest trembled. Not from pain, not from pressure, but from something older, deeper. Grief? It rose slowly, like steam from a cracked radiator. His lips pressed together, his eyes burned, and before he could stop it, a single tear fell onto the edge of the page. He didn't wipe it away. Manny leaned back against the pillow, the letter still in his hands. The hospital room around him faded into silence again, but inside, something had shifted. For years, he had used the garage as a shield, not just from grief, but from people, from noise, from change. Mateo's death had broken something inside him, and instead of repairing it, Manny had buried it under layers of work, service, and silence. But the letter was still here. And now Keanu was here. He thought about that kid from the diner. Jesse, maybe? Came by just to sweep the lot. Said he'd heard about Manny on the internet. Told him he wanted to learn. Said nobody had ever taught him how to do anything useful. Manny had shrugged him off at the time, said the shop wasn't open for lessons. But the truth was, he hadn't wanted to risk seeing another young man come and go. Not after Mateo. Not again. But maybe that wasn't the right way anymore. Maybe the right thing now was to open the doors one last time, and not for repairs, for rebuilding. He folded the letter gently, smoothing its edges with calloused fingers. Then he placed it on the nightstand next to the photo. The same photo Keanu had noticed. The one where Mateo was grinning beside the Camaro, with dirt smudged on his cheeks and a wrench in his hand. That boy had loved the garage. He'd loved working with his dad. And he had loved helping people. Manny exhaled, slow and full. Then he reached for the hospital phone. It took a minute to remember the number, but once he did, he dialed it without hesitation. The line rang twice. "Hello?" came the voice. A little groggy, but alert. "It's me," Manny said. "Hope I didn't wake you." There was a pause. "No, it's okay. I was just thinking." Manny stared at the ceiling. "You said you had a plan." "I do." Another pause. Manny cleared his throat. "Then maybe it's time we talked about it." Keanu didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "I'll be there, first thing in the morning." Manny nodded to no one. Good. He hung up, placed the receiver back into its cradle, and sat in the dark a little while longer. The machines beside him beeped on, steady and slow. For the first time since the collapse, he didn't feel like they were counting down. He felt like they were marking the start of something new. Sunlight filtered through the window early the next morning, slanting in across the hospital bed. Manny was already awake, sitting upright with the letter in one hand and a clean shirt folded in his lap. The nurses had offered to help him dress, but he waved them off. He wasn't going anywhere yet, but he wanted to be ready. He looked tired but more present than he had in days. When Keanu walked in carrying 2 coffees, Manny didn't say anything at first. He just nodded. Keanu handed him the cup. "Brought the strong stuff." Manny took it, sipped and nodded again. "Better." Keanu sat beside him. "You called." "Yeah." "You meant it?" "I wouldn't have called if I didn't." They sat in quiet for a moment. Then Manny turned slightly. "Tell me the plan." Keanu leaned forward. "The shop becomes more than just a garage. We turn it into a mentorship center. A place where kids can come and learn a real trade. Not a school, no classrooms, just hands-on work. The way you learned, the way Mateo learned." Manny looked down at his cup. Not everyone's built for this kind of work. I know, Keanu said. But some are, and they don't have anyone else. Manny tapped the cup with his finger, deep in thought. We use the fundraiser, Keanu continued. Not for profit, for renovations, tools, safety equipment, maybe even stipends for apprentices. We keep your name on the sign, and we make sure every kid who walks through those doors understands what kind of place it is. Manny didn't look up. We don't do it for publicity. No ribbon cutting, no cameras, just a quiet reopening with the right people. The kind who are ready to learn. Finally, Manny met his eyes. You really believe this can work? I do, Keanu said, because it already has. You've done it for 50 years without even trying. Imagine what it could look like if we tried on purpose. Manny leaned back slowly. He didn't speak for a while. He just stared at the sunlight crawling across the floor, like he was watching the world catch up to him. Then he said it, without emotion or fanfare. Let's do it. Keanu's lips curled into a smile. Yeah? Manny nodded. Yeah. No more arguments, no more stalling. He had made his decision. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't doing it alone. The sun was high and the sky clear the following week when Keanu stood in front of Manny's shop, a clipboard tucked under one arm and a phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm, steady, but focused. He was making things happen, one call at a time. Inside the garage, the air was still heavy with the smell of old grease and concrete dust. The tools were untouched since Manny had been hospitalized. A half-dismantled carburetor sat in a tray, waiting for hands that hadn't yet returned. But that was about to change. Keanu hung up and turned to the two men and one woman standing near the entrance. Each of them wore jeans and boots. One held a tape measure, another carried a stack of drafted sketches. None of them were strangers to hard work. One of them, Jorge, had been a former student of Manny's, now a contractor with a small crew of his own. You sure about this place? Jorge asked, glancing around the cracked floor and crumbling drywall. Keanu nodded. I'm sure. It's not just a garage. It's history. We keep the bones. We reinforce what needs help, but we don't erase a thing. The woman, an architect named Elise, flipped open her sketch pad. So it's a restoration, not a redesign? Exactly, Keanu said. We modernize the wiring, upgrade the workbenches, add a classroom corner, a small tool library, maybe even a mentorship office. But we leave the heart intact. Jorge smiled, almost wistfully. Manny taught me how to listen to engines, not just fix them, listen. My dad used to say the man could diagnose a car by the way the headlights flickered. Keanu chuckled. He probably could. A group of volunteers approached then, mostly young people, some still in community college, others from the neighborhood. A few were there because they'd once been on the receiving end of Manny's kindness. One of them, a young man named Trey, came with nothing more than a backpack and two calloused hands. I heard you're looking for help, Trey said. If this is for Manny, I'm in. Keanu looked at him, then at the others. We're not building a showroom, he said. We're building something real. If you're here to work, you're welcome. They nodded in unison. It wasn't a crew built by resumes, it was a crew built by memory. Later that afternoon, Keanu stood inside the garage, going over the blueprints with Elise and Jorge. They had cleared off a wide table and unrolled a large sheet covered in precise lines and notes. Elise pointed to the far corner of the garage near the tool storage area. We convert this space into a learning bay, set up a lift, assign small teams to each project, real hands-on work. Jorge nodded. We can reinforce that wall, put up new shelves, maybe add in some rolling tool carts, give them the right setup to learn without cutting corners. And here, Keanu added, tapping another section, we build out the office. Not for me, not for Manny, for the kids. Somewhere they can talk, get guidance, maybe even apply for apprenticeships. Trey, who had stayed behind to help measure the lot, leaned in. This is going to be huge. You really think people will show up? Damien already are, Keanu said. We're just giving them a reason to stay. That evening, after the planning team had cleared out, Keanu returned to the hospital with a folder under his arm. Manny was sitting up again, looking stronger. The nurses had finally convinced him to take short walks around the hallway, though he still grumbled the entire time. Keanu pulled up a chair and handed over the folder. "What's this?" Manny asked. "Blueprints," Keanu said. "Our plan." Manny opened the folder and stared at the first page. It showed a layout of his garage. His garage, but altered slightly. Improved. Not polished to the point of losing its soul, but modernized. Useful. He flipped the page. Notes for electrical rewiring, safety upgrades, classroom integration. Then he saw the proposed new name written across the mock-up of the garage entrance. Ortega's Garage for the Next Generation. Manny stared at the page, his mouth tightened. "And getting America to time out?" Keanu nodded. "It's your legacy. Nobody's erasing what you built. We're just giving it new life." Manny didn't answer right away. He closed the folder gently and held it in his lap. "You're serious about this, huh?" he asked finally. "Dead serious," Keanu said. Manny looked at him, long and hard. "You're not like the others. You don't talk about things. You do them." Keanu shrugged. "I had a good teacher." For a second, neither of them spoke. But something passed between them. A quiet understanding. The kind that didn't need to be said out loud to be felt. Manny set the folder aside and folded his hands in his lap. He looked tired again, but not the kind of tired that comes from pain. This was the kind that followed after letting go of something heavy. "You're going to need more hands," he said finally. "We've got them," Keanu replied. "People have been showing up every day asking how they can help. Kids you mentored, strangers who read your story, neighbors who remember the way you never said no." Manny chuckled faintly. "You make me sound like a saint." "You sound like what you are," Keanu said. "A man who gave more than he ever asked for." Manny looked toward the window, where the afternoon sun was casting a soft golden hue over the room. "You know, I always thought when I went it would be quiet. No fuss, no noise. Just me, the garage, and the end of the line." Keanu smiled gently. "Turns out, people weren't ready to say goodbye." Manny nodded. "Neither was I." They sat for a while in companionable silence, both men staring out at nothing in particular, both lost in thoughts that stretched over decades. Then Manny asked, "When do we start?" "We already did," Keanu said. "First walls come down Monday. By spring, the first group of students will walk through your doors." Manny grunted. "Better make sure they know what a wrench is before you hand them one." "We'll let you handle that part." Manny smirked. "Damn right." Keanu stood up, picking up the folder. "I'll bring the updated plans next week. We'll go over it together." Manny nodded again, more solemn now. "Thank you." Keanu paused. "For what?" "For not giving up when I told you to," Manny said. "For seeing something in this place that even I forgot." Keanu looked down at him. "I didn't see it, I felt it. That first day, when you fixed my car, I felt like I had walked into something sacred." Manny shook his head with a small smile. "You and your words." Keanu stepped back. "Get some rest. You've got work to do soon." Manny watched him go, the door closing softly behind him. For the first time in years, the old mechanic didn't feel like the last of a dying trade. He felt like the beginning of something new. The doors of Manny's auto hadn't been open for 3 weeks, but on Monday morning it was anything but quiet. Paint cans clinked near the sidewalk. Buckets of sudsy water were dragged across concrete floors. The hum of power drills and laughter echoed between walls that had spent too many years listening only to engines. The transformation had begun. Volunteers arrived in waves. Some brought tools. Others brought elbow grease and determination. Kids from local high schools came in 2s and 3s. Men and women who had once stood in this very shop, desperate for a second chance, now came back ready to give one. Jorge's crew handled the structural work, reinforcing beams, replacing wiring, lifting sagging rafters. Elise directed layout changes with blueprints in one hand and a pencil behind her ear. The old fluorescent lights were swapped for LEDs. The cracked tile near the entrance was chipped away and replaced with smooth concrete, polished and clean. But the soul of the garage, the grease-stained walls, the tool cabinets scuffed with stories, the heavy air of years spent working late into the night, remained intact. Keanu arrived early each day, dressed like the rest of them, in jeans and worn boots. He didn't give speeches. He didn't pose for photos. He picked up a broom, unloaded crates of new equipment, and hauled scrap metal to the recycling pile without a word. Most of the volunteers didn't even realize who he was. He liked it that way. Inside the garage, an old folding chair had been placed near the back corner, under a standing fan. It wasn't fancy, but it had a good view of everything. That's where Manny sat. Released from the hospital just days earlier, he was still under orders to take it easy. But resting wasn't in his nature. With a thermos of coffee at his feet and a cane resting across his lap, he barked instructions like a foreman overseeing a skyscraper. Don't hang that shelf there. It's going to block the socket. Wipe the dust before you paint. It'll peel in a week if you don't. No, you don't use a torque wrench on a drill stand. Who gave you that? Everyone obeyed. They didn't mind the shouting. They respected it. They knew what it meant. Manny wasn't sitting quietly in a hospital bed anymore. He was home. Each day, more young people arrived. Some came cautiously, unsure if they belonged. Others came because a friend told them something was happening in that old shop on 6th and Loma. Something real. There was a girl named Bianca who had never touched a wrench before, but picked up a socket set like she was born with it. A kid named Marcus, who rarely spoke, but whose eyes lit up when he disassembled his first alternator. Another boy, Darnell, had been arrested twice for stealing cars. Now he stood silently over a disassembled engine, learning how to build what he used to break. And then there was Jaden, 17, too thin, hair always tucked under a faded baseball cap. He barely spoke at first, just watched from the edge of the lot, arms folded, eyes hard. Manny noticed him immediately. The way Jaden stood, the way he pretended not to care, the way he kept showing up anyway. One morning, Manny nodded toward the boy and grunted, "Get him over here." Trey, who had taken on more of a mentorship role, called Jaden in. "You want to learn something?" Manny asked. Jaden shrugged. "Maybe." Manny pointed to an old carburetor on the workbench. "Take it apart. Don't break it." Jaden stepped forward, hesitant at first, then picked up the tools. His hands were quick, surprisingly steady. As he worked, Manny watched in silence. Something in Jaden's posture, the way he chewed his lip in concentration, the way his brow furrowed when he hit a stubborn screw, it pulled at something inside Manny. He thought of Mateo, of the way his son used to focus when they worked together, of the afternoons spent under the hood with nothing but music, sweat, and the sound of shared purpose. Jaden finished the disassembly and looked up. "Now what?" Manny didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Now we clean it, then we rebuild." Jaden gave a small nod, almost a smile. That night, after the work was done, Manny sat alone in his chair, looking out at the garage lit by fresh bulbs and surrounded by the hum of new life. The transformation wasn't just happening to the building. It was happening to him. By the end of the week, the shop looked different, brighter, sharper. The new windows let in sunlight that had once been blocked by grime and boards. The new tool benches gleamed under fresh lights. Pegboards were organized with care. Workstations had labels and instructions printed clearly for every new student. But the spirit of the place, the thing that made it matter, hadn't changed. And neither had Manny. He still called out mistakes from across the room, still cursed under his breath when someone used the wrong ratchet. But there was warmth under the gruffness now. People could feel it. Jaden stayed late most days, not because anyone told him to, just because he wanted to. One evening, after most of the crew had gone home, Manny sat watching him clean up the workbench. "You got anyone waiting on you?" Manny asked. Jaden looked up. "Nah, just me." "You in school?" "Used to be. Got kicked out." Manny nodded slowly. "You keep coming here, you'll learn something better than what they had in those classrooms." Jaden didn't say anything, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect. Maybe trust. As the boy walked past him, Manny called out, "Good job today." Jaden froze for a second, then gave a short nod before heading out into the night. Keanu showed up a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Manny, then looked around at the newly rebuilt space. "This place looks good. It should took 20 people to do what I used to do by myself," Manny said, smirking. Keanu chuckled. "Yeah, but now you're teaching them to do it right. That's the point." Manny stared out across the garage. "I used to think once I was gone, this place would die with me. And now?" Manny took a sip of coffee. "Now I think it might outlive me." Keanu smiled. "It will, because of you." The lights clicked off one by one as timers shut them down. Only a single bulb near the entrance stayed on, casting a golden glow across the freshly painted sign. It read, "Ortega's Garage for the Next Generation." Manny leaned back in his chair, the cane resting at his side, his eyes soft but steady. He wasn't just rebuilding a garage. He was building hope. The morning sun lit up the workshop floor like a stage. The old garage door had been propped open early, letting in fresh air and the faint scent of city dust and summer heat. Inside, a circle of young students gathered near the center bay, their eyes trained on the large, rust-stained table, where an old V8 engine block waited. Manny stood at the head of the group, cane in one hand, a worn rag in the other. He wasn't in his hospital clothes anymore. He wore his usual faded flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a cap tucked low over his brow. His hands, though still stiff from surgery and time, moved with practiced ease as he leaned over the engine. "This," he said, tapping the metal block with the tip of a wrench, "is a piece of junk. Or at least, that's what everyone thinks when they see it." The kids chuckled nervously. "But I want you to stop looking at it like garbage," Manny continued. "Because what this is a challenge, and a damn good teacher if you let it be." He pointed to the spark plugs, the rusted cylinder heads, the grime that had settled deep into every crevice. "Now, most places would tell you to toss this. Too much work, not worth the trouble. But we're not most places, are we?" A few of the students shook their heads. "No, sir," Bianca said, her eyes bright. "That's right. We fix what others throw away. You want to be a mechanic? Then you better start by respecting the engine. Every single part of it." He paused, resting his hands on the edge of the table. "You ever wonder why I don't start by plugging it into a machine, letting a computer tell me what's wrong?" Jaden raised his hand slowly. "Because machines don't always know?" Manny nodded. "Machines can tell you codes, numbers, data, but they can't tell you what the car's been through. They can't tell you what it sounds like when something's almost about to fail. They don't hear what I hear. You gotta listen." He walked slowly around the block, gesturing with his wrench. "Engines talk. They knock. They tick. They hesitate. They breathe. If you don't learn to hear them, you'll never fix them. Not for real." The group leaned in, absorbing every word. They weren't just learning about mechanics. They were learning how to pay attention. Manny gestured for the group to gather closer. The students circled around him, forming a quiet semicircle around the engine. He picked up a socket wrench, held it out, and nodded at Bianca. "You're up," he said. She hesitated for just a second, then stepped forward and took the tool. Her hands trembled slightly as she lined it up on the bolt. "Don't overthink it," Manny said, his voice softer now. "Just feel it. Let the tool guide you." She began turning. The bolt gave way with a low groan, and she glanced up with a wide grin. Manny gave a small nod. "Good," he said. "Next." Each student took a turn. Darnell was careful and quiet. Marcus worked faster, instinctively. Jaden was deliberate, focused, like he had something to prove. As they worked, Manny began to tell stories. Not lectures, not lessons, just stories. "See that wrench right there?" he said, pointing to a thick, dented one hanging on the wall. "I used that to fix a Chevy that broke down in the middle of a rainstorm back in '83. The driver had 3 kids in the back seat. No food, no money, just scared and wet. I didn't charge her a dime. She left a homemade pie on the doorstep a week later." The kids laughed. "Another time, I rebuilt a transmission by flashlight because the shop lost power. Finished at 3 in the morning. A guy was trying to get to his sister's wedding in Arizona." "You really did all that?" Marcus asked, eyes wide. Manny nodded. "You do enough years in this job, you collect more stories than tools." Jaden stepped forward again, wiping his hands on a rag. "Ever mess up?" Manny smiled. "All the time. Put brake pads in backward once when I was 20. The guy came back screaming. I didn't sleep for 2 days." The group laughed harder this time. Manny leaned against the bench. "Mistakes are part of it. Don't ever think you'll be perfect. But if you're honest about what you did wrong and you fix it, you'll be better the next time." Bianca raised her hand. "Did anyone ever teach you? Like this?" Manny looked off for a moment, his expression distant. "Not exactly. My old man worked in a garage when I was a kid. He didn't teach with words. He just handed me a wrench one day and said, 'If you break it, you fix it.' That was my lesson." He paused. "And I broke a lot." The group worked late into the afternoon, heads down, hands blackened with grease and sweat. They cleaned the engine, part by part. Manny guided them through reassembly, showing where each bolt belonged, how each connection mattered. It wasn't about speed, it was about rhythm, precision, respect. As they wrapped up for the day, the group stood around the table, looking at the nearly rebuilt engine. It wasn't shiny yet, but it was taking shape. The pieces were coming together. Jaden wiped his hands on a rag and looked at Manny. His voice was quiet but steady. "Thanks." Manny raised an eyebrow. "For what?" Jaden shifted his weight. "No one's ever treated me like I was worth teaching." The shop fell silent for a moment. Manny opened his mouth to say something, then stopped. His eyes dropped to the floor, then back to Jaden. His jaw worked for a second like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down. Finally, he muttered, "Get back to work." But his voice cracked just slightly on the last word. Jaden nodded. No offense taken. He understood. As the students packed up and cleaned their stations, Manny sat in his chair, pretending to organize his clipboard. Keanu stepped in from the lot, having just finished loading donated supplies into the back room. He watched the group for a moment, then turned to Manny. "How's the class?" Manny shook his head. "They don't listen. They rush, they cut corners, they act like they know everything." Keanu smirked. "Sounds like you at 20. Manny smiled, just barely. "Yeah, maybe." He looked over at Jaden, who was helping Darnell sweep the far corner of the garage. They weren't just going through the motions. They were building something. Together. "You see him?" Manny said. "Jaden?" Keanu asked. "Yeah. He's got something," Manny said. "He just doesn't know it yet." Keanu nodded. "He'll figure it out." Manny exhaled slowly. "He reminds me of Mateo." Keanu didn't say anything, just stood there beside him. "Same eyes, same stubborn streak," Manny added. "Sometimes I catch him looking at the tools the way Mateo used to, like they mean something." Keanu placed a hand on Manny's shoulder. "Then maybe that's your second chance." Manny nodded once. As the lights dimmed and the students filtered out, the garage returned to a quiet hum. The rebuilt engine gleamed under the single overhead bulb, a symbol of what was possible with old tools and new hands. And for the first time, Manny believed it too. The shop was buzzing with energy that morning. Manny had arrived early, as usual, ignoring the doctor's advice to take it slow. He leaned on his cane a little more than before, but his voice still cut through the room with the same sharp edge it always had. Jaden and Bianca were huddled over a brake caliper, arguing good-naturedly about torque settings. Darnell was reorganizing the tool wall. Trey was under the lift with Marcus, working on a rusty truck axle. Manny moved from group to group, pointing out mistakes, praising clean work, cracking the occasional joke in his dry, gruff way. The transformation of the garage was no longer just physical. It was personal. The kids weren't just learning to be mechanics. They were learning to belong. Manny stood in the center of it all, gesturing to a blueprint pinned up on the wall. "Listen," he said, tapping the paper. "You don't force an old system to do something new. You work with what's already there. You build on it." Then, mid-sentence, he stopped. His hand slipped from the pointer. He staggered a half step, then another. Bianca was the first to notice. "Manny?" He swayed again, gripping the edge of a workbench for balance. Jaden dropped his tool. "Mr. Ortega?" Manny tried to wave them off, but his face had gone pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Then his knees buckled. Jaden caught him before he hit the ground, easing him down gently. The shop froze. Every voice silenced. Every motion stopped. Keanu, who had just walked in from the back office, ran forward. He knelt beside Manny, his face tight with fear. "Call an ambulance," he said. Bianca grabbed her phone, trembling. Manny's eyes fluttered open. He looked around, confused, trying to sit up, but Keanu pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Stay still," Keanu said softly. "I'm fine," Manny whispered, his voice thin and weak. "No, you're not." Jaden hovered nearby, fists clenched, eyes wide. He was just talking. He was fine. But he wasn't, and everyone knew it. Within minutes, the sirens arrived. Paramedics wailed Manny out on a stretcher, his hands still trying to swat them away. "I've got work to do," he muttered, but his voice didn't carry. The shop door shut behind them, and a new kind of silence filled the garage. This wasn't just a health scare. This was a reminder. Time was catching up. County General was familiar now. Too familiar. The hospital staff recognized Keanu the moment he walked through the door, not because he was famous, but because he had been there before. He moved quickly down the halls, stopping only to get the room number. Manny had been admitted again, stable but weak. The doctors were running tests, checking for blockages, irregular rhythms. They didn't sugarcoat it. His heart wasn't improving. The last few months had been borrowed time. Keanu entered the room quietly. Manny was awake, but barely. The monitors beeped steadily beside him. His face was lined with exhaustion. His eyes opened slowly, finding Keanu, and softening for just a moment. "You again," Manny said, barely a whisper. "You scared the hell out of us." "I tripped." "You collapsed?" "Details." Keanu pulled a chair close and sat down. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Manny said, "The kids? They okay?" Keanu nodded. "They're here." Manny blinked. "Here?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Outside, the waiting room's full." Manny looked toward the door as if he could see through it. "That's a first." "I think they care about you," Keanu said. "More than you realize." Manny didn't respond. "The day they stopped working, the second you fell," Keanu continued. "Jaden caught you. Bianca called the ambulance. Darnell's been pacing the hallway for an hour. Even the architect and the contractor came." Manny closed his eyes, his jaw tight. "They're your family now," Keanu said. A silence passed between them. Then Manny whispered, "Then I better stick around." Keanu let out a soft laugh, but there was a catch in his throat. "That'd be good." The door creaked open gently. A nurse stepped in. "You've got visitors," she said, smiling. "I said they're outside," Keanu told Manny. Manny looked confused. The nurse motioned toward the hallway. They've filled 2 waiting rooms and half the hallway. You want me to send them in a few at a time?" Manny raised a hand. "All of them. Let them in." The nurse hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I said let them in." Within minutes, the room filled with quiet footsteps and nervous faces. One by one, the kids entered. Bianca, Jaden, Darnell, Marcus, Trey. Behind them, Jorge, Elise, and a few of the other regular volunteers. They stood at the foot of his bed, awkward at first. Then Bianca stepped forward. "We just wanted to make sure you were okay." Manny blinked at her. "I'm not dead." Jaden added, "But you scared us." Manny looked at each of them, slowly, like seeing them again for the first time. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, voice firmer now. "Not yet." The hospital room felt full of warmth, despite the sterile air and machines. For a long time, nobody moved. The kids stood by the walls and corners, trying not to look too worried, trying not to make it obvious how scared they'd been. Keanu pulled up a second chair. Trey sat on the windowsill. Bianca held Manny's hand for a second, then awkwardly let go. Darnell handed over a folded paper, an engine diagram he'd been working on. "Thought you might want something to yell at when you get bored." Manny smirked. Jaden leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. "You're not allowed to die until I can rebuild a full block without your help." "Then I guess I'm stuck for a while," Manny muttered. The nurse came in after 20 minutes and tried to clear the room, but Manny raised a hand again. "They stay." She rolled her eyes but relented. 5 more minutes." It turned into an hour. They told stories. They made jokes. Marcus shared a greasy shop prank he'd pulled on Trey involving hand soap and valve grease. Elise promised she'd put a fold-out chair into the redesign so Manny could boss everyone around without risking his heart. Jorge offered to build it himself. The more they laughed, the more Manny smiled. Eventually, the kids filtered out, one by one, quietly, respectfully. Keanu stayed behind, sitting beside Manny as the room fell silent again. Manny's voice was soft when he spoke. "You were right." "About what?" "They're my family now." Keanu nodded. "Yeah, I didn't think I had one left." "You built this one. With your bare hands." Manny looked out the window, watching the sky turn from gray to dusk. "I was afraid, you know," he said. "Afraid to let anyone close after Mateo. Afraid that if I opened the door again, I'd lose something I couldn't get back." Keanu didn't interrupt. "But this doesn't feel like loss. It feels like hope," Keanu offered. Manny gave a small nod. "Yeah." Keanu stood, placing a hand on Manny's shoulder. "Rest up. We've still got work to do." Manny gave him a look. "Only if I can yell again?" Keanu smiled. "Wouldn't have it any other way." As he walked out of the room, Manny closed his eyes, not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from peace. Because for the first time in a long, long time, he wasn't afraid of the next chapter. He was ready for it. The morning after the hospital room had been filled with students and laughter, Manny lay still in his bed, watching light dance across the ceiling. His body ached in ways he couldn't describe. Not sharp pain, not even soreness. Just a heaviness that came from too many years spent putting off the inevitable. He had a decision to make. The doctor came in just after sunrise. He was calm, kind, and clear. "It's time, Mr. Ortega," he said. "We've held off as long as we can. You need this surgery." Manny didn't respond at first. He looked out the window again, eyes following the slow drift of a pigeon across the sky. "You said the last one bought me time," he finally muttered. The doctor nodded. "It did. But this one gives you more, better odds, better life. You won't be 20 again, but you won't be back in this room every few months either. And what if it doesn't work?" The doctor paused. "Then at least you won't have spent your last weeks on the edge, wondering when the next collapse would come." That silence returned. The same one that used to scare Manny when he first started working alone. Now it felt familiar. like an old friend, waiting patiently. Then Manny said, "All right." The doctor blinked. "You're saying yes?" I said, "All right, I'll do it." No drama, no speech. Just a quiet decision from a man who had finally stopped running from help. Keanu was the first person the hospital called. He arrived 2 hours later with 2 black coffees and a quiet look in his eyes. Manny glanced over from his bed, nodded, and took the cup. "You said yes," Keanu said. "Guess I got tired of pretending I'm invincible." Keanu smirked. "I knew the act would break eventually. Don't get cocky. I wouldn't dare." They sat together in silence for a while. The sun rose higher, casting long streaks of gold on the hospital floor. It was a quiet morning, but a meaningful one. Later that afternoon, as the nurses prepped him for surgery, Manny surprised everyone. He let Bianca come in and hold his hand. He let Jaden bring in a worn photo of the shop they had framed for him. He let Darnell and Trey crack jokes, even when his mouth twitched with annoyance. And when the nurses wheeled him toward the operating room, he gave Keanu one long, steady look. "Don't let them mess up my garage while I'm gone." Keanu smiled. "Wouldn't dream of it." The surgery took 4 hours. Keanu stayed in the waiting room the entire time, sipping slowly from the second coffee he hadn't touched until now. He answered a few calls, sent a few texts. Mostly, though, he waited in silence. Bianca and Marcus came by halfway through. They didn't say much, just sat beside him, close enough to feel like they were holding the moment together. The doctor finally came out with a tired smile. "He made it through." Keanu stood up. "And he's tougher than most people I've met. Everything went as planned. We'll keep him under observation, but he's got a shot now. A real one." Keanu closed his eyes for a second. Then he nodded. When Manny woke up, it wasn't dramatic. He opened his eyes, blinked twice, and frowned at the ceiling. "This again?" Keanu chuckled from the corner. "Yeah, afraid so." Manny turned his head. "Still here? You expected me to leave?" "No," Manny admitted. "Just figured you had better things to do." "I don't." And he didn't. Every day that week, Keanu returned. Sometimes he talked about the garage. Sometimes he brought stories from his movie sets, about stunts gone wrong, about actors who couldn't drive manual cars, about scenes that took 12 takes because someone sneezed. Other times, he just sat. Some days Manny couldn't speak much. On those days, Keanu filled the silence. On others, Manny would ask about the kids. Jaden still messing up brake lines? Only once this week. Bianca still asks 100 questions? Is up to 200. Each report made Manny smile, even if just for a moment. Recovery was slow. Manny hated that. His legs felt weaker. His hands didn't always cooperate. He was used to being the strongest guy in the room. Now he needed help just to sit up. But he didn't fight it like before. When the nurse offered an arm, he took it. When Bianca offered to fluff the pillow, he let her. When Jaden came by and said, "You don't have to be tough all the time," Manny didn't argue. He just nodded. There was power in letting go of pride, and he was starting to understand that now. 2 weeks into recovery, the nurses said Manny could begin moving more freely around the floor. They offered a walker. He grunted. They insisted. He accepted, though he complained about it every step. Keanu showed up that afternoon with 2 bagels and a cup of real coffee, the kind Manny liked. No sugar, no cream, just hot and dark. "Tired of hospital food?" Keanu asked, placing the bag on the tray table. "I'd rather eat sandpaper." Keanu laughed. "You're healing, that's what matters." Manny picked at the bagel for a minute. "When can I go back?" "Doctor said maybe another couple of weeks. Depends on how hard you push." "I'm ready now." Keanu looked at him. "Then prove it. Get better. For real this time." Manny nodded. "Fair enough." That evening, as the hallway dimmed and the nurses made their final rounds, Manny looked out the window. The sky was turning amber, painted with thin clouds stretched like threads. "I used to think life gave you one shot," he said quietly. Keanu looked over. "Thought once I lost Mateo, that was it. No more chances, no more purpose." "You were wrong," Keanu said. "In shot." "Yeah," Manny whispered. "Turns out, sometimes you get a second." The silence returned, not heavy, not lonely, just calm. A few minutes later, the door opened slowly. Jaden stepped inside, holding a small box. He walked up to the bed, awkward as ever, and handed it over. Manny opened it. Inside was a keychain, simple, worn leather strap. Attached to it was a tag engraved with one line. "Thanks for giving me something to hold." Manny stared at it. He swallowed hard. Jaden mumbled, "Made it myself, with the old scrap." Manny didn't respond right away. Then he looked up and said, "That's good work." Jaden shifted. "Means a lot, coming from you." Manny closed the box slowly, resting it beside the coffee. "I'll keep it." Keanu smiled faintly. The kid left, the door shutting behind him. Manny looked down at the tag again. Then, back out at the sky. A second chance had found him. And this time, he was ready to hold on tight. The morning of the reopening was cool and crisp, with a soft breeze that rustled the row of American flags tied along the chain-link fence outside the shop. The sun cut sharp shadows across the pavement, warming the air just enough to make people linger outside a little longer than usual. It was still early, but already the sidewalk was filling up. There were old men in faded trucker caps, women with grandkids in tow, mechanics with grease under their nails, and teenagers who looked both curious and nervous. There were former customers from decades past, neighbors who'd grown up watching Manny's shop from across the street, and volunteers who had hauled lumber and paint to breathe life into the space again. And there were cameras. Local news stations had picked up the story after the viral post and the community fundraiser. They came with clipboards and questions, hoping for a soundbite, a quote, something neat and memorable. But most of them just stood quietly, watching the crowd gather with a feeling that something real was happening here. Balloons had been tied to the side mirror of an old Chevy truck that Manny had rebuilt years ago. A big blue banner stretched above the bay doors. Ortega's Garage for the Next Generation, grand opening. At exactly 10 o'clock, the music started. Soft jazz playing through a portable speaker system, and the crowd turned toward the door. Manny stepped out. He walked slow, steady, one hand gripping the cane, the other tucked in his jacket pocket. His body was thinner now, his steps more careful, but his eyes hadn't changed. They still carried that same steel, that same quiet defiance that had kept a small corner of East LA running for 50 years. The applause came quick and heavy. People clapped, some whistled, others just stood there with their hands over their hearts, eyes misting as they watched the man who had once fixed their car, or their neighbor's truck, or maybe something else entirely, walk out and take his place again. Manny didn't wave. He didn't soak it in. He just nodded. Keanu stood a few feet away, dressed in his usual dark jeans and black boots, his eyes watching every step. When Manny reached him, Keanu leaned in, offered a quiet hand on the shoulder, and whispered, "You made it." Manny replied, "Yeah, we made it." A podium had been set up just inside the garage, a simple wooden one borrowed from the local community center. Beside it, an old engine block sat on a low cart, one of the first ever fixed in this very shop. It was symbolic, kept not for use, but as a reminder of where it all started. Keanu stepped forward first. He didn't speak long, just enough to center the moment. "Most people know me from movies," he began. "From characters, roles, stunts. But today isn't about fiction. It's about a real man, one who never wanted the spotlight, who never chased attention or reward." He paused, letting his eyes sweep over the crowd. This man didn't just fix cars, he fixed lives. Quietly, patiently, over decades. He built something here that no amount of money could buy, a reputation for honesty, for kindness, for second chances. And I'm proud, honored, to have stood beside him. Keanu stepped back without waiting for applause. He turned to Manny and gave him a nod. The crowd went quiet again as Manny stepped forward. The wind rustled softly against the banner above. He gripped both sides of the podium, leaning into it slightly, steadying himself. His voice came rough and low but clear. "I don't like speeches," he said. A few chuckles rolled through the crowd. "I never opened this place thinking it would be anything more than a shop, just a corner where I could work with my hands, earn a decent living, and maybe help a neighbor or two when they were down on their luck." He looked around, pausing as his gaze landed on familiar faces. But over time it became something else, a place where people came when they were lost, where young kids wandered in, not looking for a paycheck, but for purpose. And somehow, fixing engines became a way of fixing people. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted it and gestured toward the group of students standing near the front. Jaden, Bianca, Darnell, and the others. "You want to learn to fix engines?" he asked. "Then you gotta learn to fix yourselves too, because broken parts can be replaced. But broken people, that takes more work, more patience, and sometimes more love than you think you got." There was a silence afterward. A deep one, the kind that settles into the soul. Then the applause came again, slow at first, then rising, not polite, not formal, but honest. After the ceremony, the crowd began to drift into the shop itself. The bay doors had been opened wide, welcoming everyone in. The floors gleamed from a fresh coat of sealant. The tool racks were lined with equipment, old and new. On one side, a wall had been dedicated to photos and memories, snapshots of Manny through the decades, hand-drawn cards from children, newspaper clippings, and printed testimonials from the fundraiser. Jaden led a group tour. He pointed out the learning bays, the tool lockers, the chalkboard with the week's project assignments. He spoke with surprising ease, cracking jokes, explaining processes, even demonstrating how a belt tensioner worked. Manny stood at the entrance with his cane, watching. "He's good," Keanu said, walking up beside him. "Still tight with the wrenches," Manny muttered, "but yeah, he's getting there." They stood together in the doorway, sunlight washing over them. One of the news anchors approached, mic in hand. "Mr. Ortega, would you mind answering a few questions on camera?" Manny shook his head. "Not today. But people would love to hear from you. Your story has inspired thousands." He looked at her kindly but firmly. "The story's already been told. Out there," he said, gesturing to the students. She backed away politely. Bianca came bounding over. "Mr. Ortega, come see what Darnell rigged up. He thinks he's a genius." Manny sighed. "He better not have bypassed the relay system. He says it's revolutionary. Revolution gets you electrocuted. I'm coming." Keanu laughed. Manny turned back. "You staying a while? I wouldn't miss it." The two men walked together slowly into the heart of the shop. The noise grew louder, voices calling out, tools clanking, laughter echoing off the walls. The kind of chaos that meant life was happening again. Manny paused near the old engine on display. He reached out and touched it gently. "It's strange," he said. "This thing used to be my whole world." "And now?" Keanu asked. Manny looked around at the students, at the families taking photos, at the kids leaning over engines with wide eyes and hopeful hearts. "Now it's just the beginning." Keanu nodded. "You gave them more than tools." "No," Manny said. "They gave it to me. I just didn't know how much I needed it." As the day carried on, the garage didn't feel like a business anymore. It felt like a home. And at the center of it all stood a man who once believed he had nothing left to give. Now watching his legacy come to life. One student at a time. 3 months after the grand reopening, Ortega's garage no longer looked like a reborn relic. It looked like the beating heart of a community. The garage, once just a quiet corner shop known by a handful of locals, had become something bigger than anyone expected. The building itself hadn't changed much. The same 4 walls, the same creaking door hinges, the same cracked sidewalk that Manny always swore he'd fix someday. But the people had changed everything. By now, local schools had taken notice. One public high school set up a formal partnership, busing over a handful of students twice a week for vocational hours. Teachers called it a pilot program. The students called it the only part of school they actually looked forward to. Manny wasn't one for speeches, but he gave the orientation talk every week anyway. You show up late, you miss your shot. You break something, you own it. You lie to me, you leave. But if you're here to work, I'll show you how it's done. The kids nodded. They listened. They respected him, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. Every week, more parents called, asking if there was space for their kids. Not because they needed babysitting, but because they had heard what was happening in that garage. They heard about the change in attitude, the confidence growing in students who used to dread every school bell. Keanu had quietly taken care of the red tape. He met with community leaders, called in favors, and brought in advisors to help form a small nonprofit foundation. The funding came from a mix of small grants, neighborhood donations, and one anonymous endowment, large enough to secure the shop's future for decades. That anonymous donor, of course, wore a black leather jacket and brought real coffee every morning. But he never talked about the money. He just talked about spark plugs, balance shafts, and how lucky he was to be part of something this real. Inside the garage, Manny had his eye on 3 students in particular. Not because they were the smartest or the strongest, but because they listened. Bianca had a head for diagnostics. She could hear a misfire and tell you which cylinder it came from without opening the hood. Jaden had patience. He double-checked everything. Never rushed, never panicked. And Trey had heart. He picked up every dropped tool, stayed after hours, and learned by watching others when his own hands failed him. Manny started pulling them aside for extra lessons, not because he needed help, but because someday the shop would need someone else to lead. On Wednesday afternoons, Manny started holding quiet hour. No drills, no lectures, just sitting around the big steel workbench, tools in hand, questions welcome. It was less about mechanics and more about mindset. "Don't let pride cost you a job," he said once, pointing to a stripped bolt. I could have stopped and asked for help. Instead, I snapped it. Cost me half a day. You're not weaker for asking, you're wiser. The students scribbled notes. Even Keanu occasionally pulled up a stool to listen. One afternoon, Manny brought in a faded blueprint from the 1980 SA redesign for a carburetor he had started years ago but never finished. He laid it out on the table, spread across oil-stained paper. "I didn't know what I was doing back then," he admitted. "Still don't sometimes. But that's not a reason to stop." He nodded at Bianca. "You finish it." She blinked. "What?" "You're ready. I'll help. But you're taking the lead." She didn't stop smiling for 2 days. As weeks rolled on, the garage became a place where stories met structure. Kids from broken homes found stability in the routine. Former dropouts gained confidence rebuilding engines. Even the local city council began mentioning Ortega's garage as a model for restorative education. Manny kept showing up, even on his bad days. There were still moments when he needed to sit longer, still days when he said little. But the difference now was clear. He let people help. Jaden often brought him a fresh towel without being asked. Bianca handed him the torque specs before he reached for them. Trey started organizing the parts shelf every Thursday morning like clockwork. It wasn't pity, it was respect. The kind you earn one lesson, one repair, one shared silence at a time. Keanu kept showing up too, sometimes with snacks, sometimes with a camera to document progress for the foundation board, sometimes with nothing but time. Never made it about himself, never asked for thanks. He just stayed. And Manny? He started smiling more. Not big grins, not showy displays. but real ones, quiet, worn into the edges of his face like they had been waiting for years to return. One day, a younger student named Luis asked him, "Mr. Ortega, do you ever wish you did something else?" Manny looked up from the bench. "Like what?" "I don't know. Something bigger." Manny leaned back, looked around at the room filled with students, mentors, memories. He smiled. "What's bigger than this?" By late fall, the garage was running like an engine at peak performance. The morning classes were full, the afternoon crews were focused, the weekends brought in guest speakers, retired mechanics, automotive engineers, and even a couple of racing technicians who volunteered their time to show the kids what was possible. But every week, the rhythm returned to the same center: Manny. He wasn't on the floor as much, his steps were slower, his voice a little raspier, but when he spoke, the room quieted. When he demonstrated, the kids leaned in. When he handed someone a wrench, it meant trust. Bianca had begun shadowing him closely. She ran the morning checks, helped guide the new students through safety orientation, even started designing lesson plans based on Manny's notes. Jaden took over maintenance. He made sure every jack was stable, every air compressor checked. He noticed things now: worn wires, loose sockets, rattles that didn't belong. He listened. Trey became the heartbeat of the shop, the encourager, the one who always found the nervous kids sitting outside and pulled them in. Keanu watched all of it unfold. One afternoon, he found Manny sitting alone near the open garage door, sipping coffee, watching the sunset slide along the concrete floor. "You ever think it'd end up like this?" Keanu asked, pulling up a chair. Manny shook his head. "I thought I'd die behind the wheel of a car no one remembered. And now?" Manny sipped. "Now I think maybe, just maybe, I built something that'll outlive me." He did. They sat in silence, the sounds of the shop behind them, wrenches clanking, kids laughing, a soft hum of conversation. Keanu pulled something from his pocket, a small plaque, matte black with silver lettering. He handed it over. Manny read it. "To Manny Ortega, for fixing more than engines, for building lives." Manny swallowed hard. "You didn't have to do that," he muttered. "I know," Keanu said. "But we wanted to." The next day, the plaque was mounted above the main workbench. No spotlight, no ceremony. Just a small reminder to anyone who entered that the man who built this place wasn't just a mechanic. He was a mentor, a teacher, a legacy in motion. And on a cool Thursday afternoon, as the shop buzzed around him and a dozen lives spun forward under his guidance, Manny Ortega sat back in his chair, let the warmth reach his face, and allowed himself something rare: a full, honest smile. The day started like any other at Ortega's garage. The morning sun broke gently through the wide bay doors, casting gold across the oil-streaked floors. Bianca was already sorting parts for the afternoon workshop. Jaden was under the hood of a pickup with Trey, explaining the timing belt system with the kind of authority that made Manny smirk in quiet pride. Manny arrived just after 8, slow but steady, walking with his cane like it was a stubborn partner rather than a crutch. He nodded at the students as he passed. A few offered waves. One of the newer kids, Luis, called, "Morning, Mr. Ortega," like he meant it. But something felt off. People were too smiley, too purposeful. They whispered more than usual, glancing at Manny and then darting away. Bianca kept checking the clock. Jaden avoided eye contact, and Keanu, who always walked through the front with a coffee and a joke, was nowhere in sight. Manny narrowed his eyes. "What are you all scheming?" he muttered. No one answered. They just grinned wider. Around noon, Darnell came over, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said, "Mr. O, could you come out back a sec? We need your advice on a carb adjustment." Manny grumbled. "You kids better not be butchering another one of my V6S." "We wouldn't dare," Darnell said. Manny followed him slowly through the garage, out past the storage racks, and around to the side lot, where the sun hit harder and the asphalt still shimmered from morning heat. He turned the corner and stopped cold. There, parked under a faded canvas tarp, was a car. But not just any car. It was a 1965 Ford Mustang. Fastback, steel blue with polished chrome trim, the kind of car that turned heads even when it wasn't moving. It looked brand new. The tarp had just been pulled off, and standing beside it, holding a ring of keys and a grin big enough to light the whole block, was Keanu. Manny blinked. "What?" Keanu held out the keys. "It's yours." Manny didn't move. Bianca stepped forward, beaming. "We did it ourselves. Took us 3 months. Found the chassis at a junkyard. Rebuilt everything from scratch." Jaden added, "Keanu helped us get the parts. But the work? All student hands." Manny's voice barely came out. "Why?" Keanu walked over and opened the driver's side door. Inside, mounted just below the glove box, was a small silver plaque. Manny leaned in and read it. "For Mr. O, who taught us more than engines." His hand trembled. For a long moment, Manny didn't say anything. The keys stayed frozen between his fingers. His eyes remained fixed on the plaque, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "You guys did this?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. "All of us," Trey said, standing beside Marcus and Luis. "We figured you gave us a future. We wanted to give you a ride." The kids chuckled at the line, but Manny didn't. He reached up and rubbed his eyes as if clearing dust. Then he muttered, "You damn movie star." Keanu grinned. "Guilty." Manny looked around at the group, at their hopeful faces, their grease-stained hands, their pride. He ran a palm slowly along the Mustang's hood. The paint job was flawless, the curves perfect. The detail, the stitching, the emblem, the restoration of every bolt, spoke of hours upon hours of careful work. He opened the door wider and sat down slowly in the driver's seat. The leather was soft but firm. The smell inside was new, but the soul of the car? That was old school. "This feels like 1972 all over again," he murmured. "You ready to take it out?" Keanu asked. Manny turned the key. The engine fired with a clean, powerful rumble. Smooth as silk. Manny nodded once, lips pressed into a line, trying hard not to let his emotion show. But it was there, shimmering behind his eyes. He glanced over at Keanu. "You driving?" Keanu shrugged. "You're behind the wheel. I'm just the passenger." Manny grunted. "Then get in." Keanu climbed in on the passenger side, the door clicking shut with that satisfying old-school thump. The crowd stepped back as Manny eased the Mustang forward. The car rolled onto the street like it had waited decades for this exact moment. As the tires caught the edge of the road, Manny tapped the gas. Not hard, just enough. And then, down the long stretch of East Loma Avenue, they went. Not fast, not loud, just steady. Sunlight poured across the hood. The breeze rolled through the open windows. Manny's hands rested confidently on the wheel. Neither man spoke for a while. Then Keanu said, Manny nodded. More than okay. They passed the corner store, the diner, the old laundromat with the busted neon sign, and everywhere they went people waved. Not because of Keanu's face, but because of Manny's. Because Manny Ortega had become more than a mechanic. He had become a symbol. They turned onto the side street that led toward the hill overlooking the city. It wasn't far, just a couple miles from the garage, but it had a view. One that stretched all the way to the skyline, with telephone poles lining the road like sentinels guarding a quiet moment. Manny pulled up to the top and parked. The engine purred gently as it settled. The afternoon sun bathed the world in a golden glow, painting long shadows across the asphalt. Keanu stepped out, walked around to the driver's side, and leaned on the hood. Manny stayed seated, hands still on the wheel. "You've still got it," Keanu said. Manny smirked. "I never lost it." A pause, the kind of pause that says more than words. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Manny said, finally stepping out of the car and leaning beside Keanu. "What's that?" "Mateo." Keanu nodded, saying nothing. "I would have loved this, teaching like this, seeing the kids light up. I think this is what he meant when he said I shouldn't close myself off." Keanu looked over. "You think he's proud?" Manny didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the horizon, where the sun hovered low, throwing orange light across the buildings below. "I do," he said softly. They stood there for a while, watching the city breathe beneath them. Finally, Keanu turned toward him. "So, what now?" Manny looked back at the Mustang, then at the horizon, then down at his own hands. Worn, scarred, calloused, but steady. "Now I drive," he said. "And when I can't anymore, I hand off the keys." Keanu smiled. "To Jaden? Maybe. Or Bianca? Or Trey. Doesn't matter who, as long as they remember what this place was built on." "And what was that?" Manny looked over. "Trust. Patience. Doing it the right way, even when no one's watching." The Mustang hummed beside them like it understood. Keanu offered a hand. Manny shook it. Then, without another word, they got back in the car. Manny turned the key one more time. The engine roared gently to life, eager but controlled. As they drove down the hill, the street stretched ahead of them like a ribbon of memory and promise. 2 men, 1 car. No destination, just motion. Because some journeys don't need a finish line. They just need the right person in the driver's seat. Manny Ortega never set out to change the world. He didn't have a master plan, a media strategy, or a dream that reached past the faded garage door he opened every morning for 5 decades. He didn't ask for recognition, attention, or applause. He asked only for the sound of an engine running right, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done something honest that day. But sometimes, those are the men who leave the biggest marks. In a world where everything moves faster and faster, where the value of patience and skill is often forgotten beneath digital convenience, Manny's hands slowed time. They told stories without saying a word. They bore the marks of years spent gripping tools, not out of habit, but out of purpose. Each callus was a page in a history that few ever thought to read. And yet somehow, his story found its way into the lives of so many. It spread not through headlines, but through word of mouth, through late-night conversations, through a stranger's Facebook post about a mechanic who once fixed her brakes for free because she needed to get to a chemotherapy appointment, through a worn envelope passed from father to son with the words, "Take your car to Mr. O. He won't lie to you." The plaque in his garage says it simply, "He taught us more than engines." And it's true. He taught young men who thought they were worthless how to use their hands and their hearts at the same time. He taught young women who were told they didn't belong in a garage that Greece didn't care about gender, only about focus and grit. He taught kids from broken homes that machines, like people, can be rebuilt with patience and care. Keanu Reeves may have helped bring the story to the surface, but it was Manny who planted the roots. And now, those roots were growing. Across the city, word spread of Ortega's garage, not because it was trendy, not because it had flashy equipment or sleek uniforms, but because it worked, because it gave people something to believe in, something to hold. Local newspapers started calling it a sanctuary for second chances. Parents whispered about it at school pickup lines. Counselors called, asking for open slots. Kids who never thought they'd succeed in school were now waking up early to arrive on time for shop class. And every day, Manny showed up. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Some days he sat back and watched. Other days he guided. Some mornings he took extra time to show Jaden how to reassemble an alternator by feel alone. Some afternoons he laughed with Bianca over her prototype blueprints for a fuel-efficient mod kit. Some evenings he just sat with Keanu at the edge of the lot, sharing silence between two men who understood how rare it was to find something real. One day, a new boy named Eric arrived. He was 15, nervous, thin, shoulders hunched, like life had already taught him to expect disappointment. He stood at the doorway, gripping his transfer form in one hand and a worn-out wrench in the other. No one had told him to bring it. He just thought he might need it. Manny walked over, looked at the boy, nodded at the wrench. "You know what that is?" Manny asked. Eric nodded. "Sort of." Manny didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just reached out and placed his hand gently over Eric's, adjusting the grip. "Then let's teach you the rest." It was a small moment, quiet and remarkable to anyone walking by, but inside that shop, it echoed like thunder. That's how legacies work. Not always with loud applause or grand declarations. Sometimes they show up in the way someone listens, the way they teach, the way they reach out quietly and remind you that you're worth guiding. Manny Ortega didn't live to see a national award. He didn't build a franchise. He didn't sell out or cash in. But what he built with his bare hands and steady voice may last longer than any headline or honor ever could. Keanu often said, "I've met actors who played heroes, but Manny, he was the real thing." And he was, because Manny didn't need a script. He just needed a wrench, a willing student, and a place to belong. Now, long after the engines quiet down for the night, the garage stays lit. The hum of new voices, the clang of practice, the hope of second chances. That's his story. That's what he left behind. And it's still being written every time a student says, "I didn't think I could do this," and someone replies, "Yes, you can." Every time a hand reaches for a socket wrench instead of a shortcut. Every time a kid from a broken place walks through those doors and finds the courage to build again. So here's our question to you. Have you ever met someone like Manny? Someone who changed your life? Not with a big gesture, but with a quiet act of kindness? Maybe it was a teacher who stayed after class, a neighbor who fixed your bike when you were 8, a stranger who told you something you didn't know you needed to hear. We'd love to hear about them. Share their story in the comments. Let's make sure people like Manny aren't forgotten. And if you believe that the smallest gestures can carry the greatest weight, if you believe there's still room in this world for grace, for patience, and for doing things the right way, tell us what story we should tell next in Keanu's journey. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about explosions or action sequences. They're about people. People like Manny. And maybe, just maybe, people like you.